The darkness wrapped itself around me like a long-lost lover. Embraced deeply in the breast of inky black, a soft sound echoed through the silence. At first it was a soft hum, reverberating like the purr of a cat. Slowly the sound rose until I recognized it for the cacophony of wicked laughter that it was.
"Hello, girl,"
his voice whispered all around me. I tried to push myself into a sitting position but found myself unable to move.
"Tell me you are afraid."
My eyes were still trying to focus. There was still nothing but shadows.
"Tell me. Tell me!"
You are nothing. My voice sounded small and weak. He let loose a feral growl. I wriggled my fingers and toes. My body felt both heavy and light, like I was both floating and sinking at the same time. Fear nipped at my heart. It pounded so hard I thought surely he could hear it.
"Tell me!"
Hot, wet breath against my neck and ear. I found myself jolting up awkwardly, my body moving at the speed of light and yet sluggishly. What was this place? Where was I? Was I dead? I could see flickers of movement through the dark. I could feel what felt like a heavy, cold mist surrounding me. My heart beat so hard I could hear the rush of my blood in my ears.
"If you will not say it, I will make you."
For an eternity, the monster tortured me with macabre visions. Mother slicing her wrists in the kitchen that day so long ago. Tiny Mika torn to shreds by wolf-like creatures in the icy woods when I sent her for help. Father hanging himself in the closet. I refused to respond, so he stared again. Over and over I watched as the monster tore through all those I dearly loved, each time a new and horrific way. My tears fell until my soul was emptied. When I could say nothing, he changed his tactics. Instead, he showed me my death, each one more brutal than the last. Still, I kept my mouth shut tightly. I watched as he created visions of me slaughtering anyone and everyone I'd ever met. In time, the ache in my heart stopped, and I just blankly watched every awful thing the monster could think of.
"Why?"
he asked after a millennium. Why, I wondered. Why couldn't I just give in? Why was he so intent on making me miserable, sad, and afraid? Why couldn't I tell him that he had pushed me past the point of no return long ago? There was a murmuring sound, like muffled voices. I tried to peer through the darkness. Had it gotten lighter? His oppressive presence began to burn with rage. The shroud around me practically vibrated with it. Was I the only one to ever say no? I started to laugh and turned to him, finally with an answer. I could make out his massive shape. The murmuring grew louder. The darkness lifted a little more. I wiggled my finger at the monster, gesturing for him to come closer. I placed one hand on what I assumed to be his shoulder and leaned in where I thought near might be. "Are you afraid yet?" I whispered. The smell of earth and the must of dead leaves, I struggled to breathe. But something covered my face. While I could hear the monster screaming in my head, the murmuring was clear now. "Your fault." I was wrapped in a cocoon of cold and damp. My mouth was filled with the metallic taste of blood. What fresh horror was this? Stupid slut. With a wretched gasp, something wet and gritty fell into my mouth, and a soft thump was felt on my ankles. Dirt? I rolled the grit over my tongue. Definitely dirt. What was the monster up to now? I strained to open my eyes, only to be greeted with dirt in the one eye that I did open. A strange sound like sandpaper brushing across metal preceded another soft thump, this time on my knees. I'm being buried. Panic, like a boiling bile, rose up in my throat. Another thump, this one harder and more solid, landed on my stomach. Crap. Who was speaking? My right arm moved of its own accord, shooting out the dirt and grabbing a strange warm protrusion. It hurt to move, but I found myself sitting up, one eye opening slowly, coming face to face with Douche. His eyes were wide and full of fright. The flashlight he must have dropped onto my stomach illuminated my firm grip on his Adam's apple. A deep, crazed giggle bubbled up and broke the dead silence surrounding us. Is that coming from me? My face began to pull as though invisible fingers had hooked into my cheeks, stretching the skin painfully. My lips were being forced apart and pulled so tightly the bruised flesh split and began to bleed. I'm alive. Douche looked like he was about to crap his pants. My body shuddered, and I felt a rumble in my throat. It was laughter. The horrible laughter that haunted my childhood. It came out of the stiff, open-mouthed grin that was plastered across my face.
Are you afraid, boy?
It was my voice, but it wasn't. Deuce tried to swat my hand away from his throat, but instead fell into the shallow grave with me. The monster's laugh echoed through the trees. Helplessly, I felt my body move. I was on Douche in an instant, straddling his torso. I finally had the upper hand.
How does it feel, boy, to have the tables turned?
The monster was using my mouth. Both of Douche's calloused hands wrapped around my throat and squeezed. Instead of trying to pull them away, I leaned in, still grinning, and placed my dirt-crusted hands on his face. My thumbs slid under his eyes, digging deep into their sockets. I flexed my thumbs up and Douche's eyes popped out with a sickening slurp, one eye splattering its juices across my face. I roared with the laughter and licked the vile juice from my bloodied lips. It was salty like the tears I hadn't shed in eons.
Are you scared now?
I asked. Douche covered his face, screaming.
I'll take that as a yes.
I stood and tried to climb my way out. Instead, my fingers found the long handle of the shovel he had been using to bury me. My face pulled into that tight grin again.
I should have left you an eye, so you could see what I'm going to do to you.
The monster's voice growled. Stop! Please! I'll do anything! Douche begged.
I'll give you the same mercies you gave me.
Merry, malicious laughter rang through the air, cutting Douche's whimpers like a knife. I pressed the pointed tip of the shovel's spade into the soft flesh of his belly and pushed. He struggled, swinging his arms wildly, his one deflated eyeball swaying from his orbital socket in his frenzy. A giggle escaped my lips at the satiating sight. He thrashed his legs, trying to topple me down. The monster was too strong. Placing one foot on the top of the spade, I applied as much of my body weight as possible. The noise that escaped Douche was a cross between a squeak and a high-pitched whine. He grabbed at the shovel feebly as I ripped it back out, slick offal splattering his torn abdomen, and tossed it back to the surface. Kneeling on his pelvis, I began to stuff at the gaping maw of a wound with the very earth he had tried to bury me with, laughing maniacally all the while. He opened his mouth to scream his last, but I wouldn't allow it. I punched him in his throat as hard as I could, causing him to gasp like a fish, and shoved a bloody fistful of dirt down his throat. I would say his eyes were wide, but they were also empty of the cruel irises that used to stare down at me.
Are you afraid?
Douche nodded yes. The terrifying cacophony of my voice mingling with the monster's filled the woods with laughter. At some point I climbed from the grave and buried him. Whether he was dead before that last shovelful of earth, I don't know. I was numb. What had the monster made me do? Was it in me now? With my crime hidden in the monster quiet, I wandered the woods. I was barefoot and barely clothed. It hurt to move, to breathe, to think. But still I walked. When I found a small river, I scrubbed at myself in its waters. I tried to wash off the defiled feeling, but even after scrubbing myself raw, I couldn't shake it. Eventually I found Douche's car hidden behind bushes by a dirt road. He had left his phone in the seat, and keys in the glove compartment as he was wont to do. I got in and drove. I drove until the sun began to rise and blind my eyes that were so used to the dark. I was on E anyways. His phone crashed onto the road when I climbed into the car. I stared blankly at it and felt rage fill my body. Rage at the things I endured by his hand. Rage at the monster for using me. I smashed the phone with the heel of my bare foot. I wiped down the inside of the car and climbed into the trunk, into the dark. The only place I felt comfortable now. Someone must have come across the car as I slept. They found me locked in the trunk. Wrapped in the tarp douche must have laid down to protect his stupid upholstery from my blood. When I awoke in the hospital, it was days later. The nurse and doctors informed me I'd suffered a massive head trauma, broken ribs, a fracture that spanned the length of my maxilla from my teeth to my orbital socket, another down my sternum, a punctured lung, and a hand-shaped bruise around my throat amongst other bumps, bruises, and cuts. I was lucky to be alive. They said that to expect me to feel different than before, that it was okay to be scared. The cops explained that it looked like my husband had thought he killed me, scrubbed my body down to remove any evidence of him, and thrown me in the trunk of his car. When he ran out of gas, he must have panicked, said the detective. He broke his phone so we couldn't track his GPS, and took off. But don't worry, ma'am, we'll find him. I opened my mouth to speak, but all that came out was a raspy, monster. Don't try to speak yet. You did a number in your throat, sweetheart. After countless hours of physical therapy and even more psychotherapy, I'm deemed right as rain. The doctors say I made up the monster as a way to cope with the abuse, because I didn't want to see either my monster or the man I loved as my abuser. Except I never loved that man, and they don't know about that dark night in the woods. No one does. I no longer live only in the dark abyss where the monster once held me captive. Now I can live in the light, making my childhood mantra and prayer into my curse. There's nothing in the dark that isn't in the light. The monster is real.